So welcome. We got a nice group of you, Cecilia, Old School Dan, Bill Martin, Natalie, Sally, Casey. Let's see who else we got here. Eric and Lauren and Elliot. Thanks for coming, and there'll probably be some more coming in. So this actually is the first regular webinar of the quarter. The orientation webinar is very different. That's required to be there live. I don't do any math, no statistics at all. That's just about the class. This one, on the other hand, is more normal in terms of what these webinars are going to be about. And these are going to be about material. And I want to let you know, we're going to go over chapters 1 and chapters 2. The purpose of this webinar is not to give every detail that is in the 2 chapters. That's in all the other stuff I've got. One of the things about the webinar I like to do is make this relevant and make it current relevant. So bring in things that are going on today or going on this year that are very relevant to what we're studying this week. And also highlights. I like to focus on the highlights of what's in those chapters. So that is the plan of the day. The other thing, and this is for all webinars, is another big purpose of this webinar is to be able to do live Q&A time. So I can help you out if you have any questions. Just ask and I'll answer. What I usually do once I start presenting stuff is I mute you all, but then unmute yourself, ask a question, then remute. And that way we don't hear your background stuff. Sometimes it's fun, actually, but sometimes it's embarrassing for you. You know what I mean? So if you can mute yourselves, that's always best, unless you need to talk, and then unmute yourself. And then at the very end, unmute everyone, so that, because that's total discussion and nothing else. So I want to say a few things. First is, unlike the other ones, this one is absolutely recorded. And just let you know that this is going to get posted on YouTube. So if you don't want to be seen or heard, know that. You can always take your camera and turn it off. But no one's really interested. Okay? You may think you're exciting, but it's just not that exciting for people outside of this class. But you never know. Maybe you'll run for president and you'll have said something really awful and it'll come up down to haunt you. But I doubt it, because hopefully you don't say anything awful. So this is public, just to let you know. So when you have questions, they're public. The chat will not be public. Chat, I believe, does not get posted on YouTube. Only what we're seeing right now and what we're hearing right now. So that's just a note for public-private stuff. I always like to say that at the beginning. But again, people outside this class don't watch it. It's just hardly ever. But it is on YouTube. So that's a couple things, and that'll be true of all the rest of the webinars. So I want to ask you, do you have any questions about the class or about anything else that I might be able to answer? That could be any of you.
Hey Larry, I've got one question.
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday I started doing the first quiz, and I was just a little bit into it, and I accidentally pressed like submit, and I was going to go back to it, but I was wondering, I can go back into that and continue it, can't I?
Yeah, you should be able to go back to it and continue it. And even if you get a problem wrong, you can actually redo that problem too.
Cool. Yeah, because it gave me a grade, even though I wasn't finished with it.
Absolutely. It'll give you a grade, and that grade can be improved. Has anyone else tried that? I've never had anyone say that they can't do it, but I just want to make sure nothing changed this quarter. I mean, I created this, but I didn't make the background system, but I'm pretty sure nothing's changed. So you should be okay. And again, if not, let me know, but give it a try. Work on another problem and watch your grade go up. Your grade can't go down, by the way. Because if you get a problem right, and then you I want to practice that one more time because I got it right, but it was multiple choice. I didn't really understand it. And then you get it wrong the next time, you keep your point. That's one thing, is that the point stays, which is always a good thing. Okay, other questions? Any other questions? Okay, just to let you know, I try and keep these, again, in between an hour and a half.
I bet you can.
So I try to keep these somewhere in between an hour and a half. It could go a little less, but I really try to make sure it doesn't go any more. Towards the end, not usually at the very end, that's when I post a secret word. And whether you're watching this as an archive video on YouTube or whether you guys, like all of you I'm looking at, are live, when you're done watching this, go to the secret word quiz on Refund module and type in the secret word. But you don't have it yet, but I will promise I will give it to you. In fact, I'm looking at it now and you can't. You will be able to. So any last questions before I start going on to chapter 1, chapter 2 stuff? Going once, twice, and again, you can always ask questions, even if I say done. Okay, done.
Yeah, what's your PIN number?
Yeah, I'll see if you can figure it out. It's the last 4 digits of pi.
Last 4 digits of pi. Okay. Yeah.
So let me know if you can figure it out. Okay, so anyhow, I'm gonna do what I can to mute you so that we don't have background music, but unmute yourself if you need to talk, if you have any questions or whatever. And there'll be times that I'm gonna be asking you questions too. And you can post in the chat box or whatever. What I wanna do is I wanna share my desktop. I wanna talk to you about something that happened this year. And those in Tahoe might know a little bit. Those outside of Tahoe, you can trust me, it happened. So a bunch of months ago, there was a candidates forum. Since the elections are coming up not so long from now. And the candidates forum was actually held at our college. And what happened is I went and I listened to there were three candidates that talked about it. It was actually the Democratic candidate forum for the Congress, National Congress. And right now, our congressperson is Bill McClintock, and he's Republican. And the Democratic Party was interested in seeing who they should endorse to win against McClintock. Okay, that was their goal. So at the end of that candidate forum, they passed out a survey. And at the end of I walked up to the organizer and I said, if you don't mind, can you give me the data and your results when you're done analyzing it, and that way I can bring it to my class. So what happened is they did that, and I looked at it, and something was really clear to me, and that is they had not taken my class, okay, or anyone else's statistics class. So I found that they were all volunteers, so it's not like they were paid differently, they weren't paid at all, and they weren't corrupt or anything, but they definitely didn't understand statistics. So I thought I would share with you some things that if you want to get involved in politics that you might want to understand in statistics. So the first thing is I want to share with you the spreadsheet that what I did is I emailed them back and I said, well, I looked at your results and here's some issues. And then I went and did it myself, and here's what I found. And I wrote kind of a paragraph that was really simple for them. And then I wrote a paragraph that was full statistics, knowing that the second paragraph they probably didn't really understand. But I need to do that for myself at least. So let me show you the results of that study, or at least the data. So I'm going to share my desktop. Let me go find it. This one. Okay, and so this is a spreadsheet program, and this was the results that they did. Okay, so I don't know, some of you are from Tahoe, I think. I'm not sure about who's here and who's not here, but anyone attend that forum? You can unmute and say, yes, I did. Again, it happened at this college. Nobody? Okay, there were a lot there. There were probably, I don't know, a whole bunch of people. You can kind of look. 57 people filled out the survey. So most of the people there filled it out. So that's pretty many. And the candidates that were there were Bateson, Calderon, and Morse. Okay? And this is true. This isn't some, something from a book. This just happened. And so the first question, and I'm going to ask you guys, again, we do some interactive stuff, is if you are the Democratic Party and you want to find out who to endorse based on what people think, what survey question would you ask? So let's see if you can either put in the chat box or just say it. What would you ask people? They've listened to this candidate forum, and we got these 3 candidates.
What are their positions on education? Spending.
Okay, what is your, but you want to find out who to endorse. And you're going to ask not Morse and Bateson and Calderon, you're going to ask the people in the audience. Does that make sense? To find out which person to endorse, which of the 3, based on their opinions.
Who presented themselves the best?
Okay, so that's one thing you could ask. You could ask who presented the best, in terms of the way you feel or whatever. And that's a good question. That's a good question. And there is a little bit of an issue to that. It's not a big issue. But the answer to that would be either, obviously, Bateson, Calderon, or Morse. And one thing about that is what's called a qualitative data question, qualitative variable. The word qualitative means it's a word answer and not a number answer. Does that make sense? Because if I ask the person, or if they ask the person who presented themselves the best, they're not going to say 75. They're going to say Morse, or they're going to say Calderon, or they're going to say Bateson. Okay, that doesn't sound like a big deal, except if you're going to do statistics. It's nice to get things like an average or a standard deviation. So you're going to want to get a numerical values so that you can best analyze it mathematically. Does that make some sense? And it's very hard to get numerical values out of answers that are just names. You can't take an average of Morse plus Bateson plus Calderon divided by 4. Okay, it doesn't make any sense, right? Is that clear?
Yeah, okay, so instead of qualitative, it would be something like who had the most points that they made during their speeches.
Okay, so that would be a good answer. And that would be, but the problem with that is it's a who. And the answer to who had the most points would be Morse had the most points. So you're close, but you got to be very careful about how you ask the question. Who had the most points is still qualitative. Does that make sense? Because the answer to any question that starts with who is not a number.
Okay, it's not a number. Okay, gotcha.
So maybe I should mention, because I'm not hearing what happened. So what they did is they said, rank your candidate. 1 being best, 2 being middle, and 3 being worst. Does that make sense? And then you could very easily take the average rank. Any questions on that?
No, that's better. I understand.
And if I say, rank your candidate Morse, you're going to say 2, and that's a number. Do you see that? And when you have numbers as the answer, you could much better do statistics to analyze it. Okay, if you can. Okay, it doesn't mean you shouldn't ever have words as an answer, but if you can do numbers, that's better. Any questions on that? So then you do statistics, and the statistics you might be interested in, one of them is average. What is the average ranking? Okay, and in fact, I'll tell you what really happened. After the candidates forum for one, and I found out they had made mistakes in lots of them. I don't want to diss them too much. They were good people and they were really trying, and then they worked with me, and then they listened and they changed their results to be right. So they fixed them. I helped them fix their mistakes. So the idea here is, what the survey question they ended up asking is, instead, what they said is, because what they cared about is who is most likely to beat McClintock. Because if you're the Democratic Party, number one is you end up having a Democrat in office. Does that make sense? So that was what they decided, with some consultation with me actually, on, so instead of who, it was rank the candidate on whether they're going to beat McClintock or not, right? Most likely to beat is 1, middle is 2, and not likely at all is 3. Does that make sense? Okay, so then you want to look at what's called statistics. Now that must be important because that's the name of this class, right? So what statistics are numbers that you get from the data. Okay, and I don't mean the answer to the question, but you look at everybody's answer, and then you get one number out of those out of all those answers. So the one that I'm sure all of you know is the average. Do you all agree? I hope you all know what the average is, right? Add them up and divide by the total.
Yes.
Okay, that's a statistic. That's called a statistic. Okay, and just a note, it's called a statistic because we only have a sample. They were not able to survey every Democrat in all of the 5 county regions that is the region for this particular senator. Does that make sense? So they were only able to collect data from a subset of the whole population. The subset of the whole population is called a sample. So you have the sample, which is everybody. You have the subset, which is the sample. From the sample, they can collect statistics. The most important statistic is the mean. The mean is what you're used to hearing, average. Okay? Means add them up, divide the total. Any questions on that? So that is the most important statistic. The next most important statistic is called the standard deviation, and that's a lot more complicated. You probably maybe have all heard those words before. Does it sound right? You don't want to jump in and say anything, but you might have heard those words before. Is that true?
Yeah.
My guess is, if just looking at the spreadsheet, if I say find the standard deviation for, see, most likely to beat McClintock right here, for most likely to beat McClintock from these numbers, and you had to do it by hand, it wasn't going to happen. Am I right?
It would take a while for sure.
You wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, you'd say no. If not, then there's something wrong with you, actually.
Unless you really like numbers.
Yeah, I love numbers. I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Okay? But the calculator can do it very easily. And so can a spreadsheet. This is actually a spreadsheet. Very easy to create a standard deviation with a spreadsheet. Very easy with a calculator. I'll show that in a little bit. What the standard deviation tells you is how varied the numbers are. Okay? So it doesn't tell you how high the numbers are or how low the numbers are, but it tells you how far from the mean the numbers are, on average. Okay? So if the people are all over the place in terms of how they answered, then you're going to have a very large standard deviation. If everybody is pretty much uniform in how they answer, you're going to have a very small standard deviation. Does that make some sense? So the standard deviation is really important, because if everybody is like all saying the same thing, then you can probably say that the population just thinks that way. Whereas if people are all over the place and you look at the mean, well, the population is probably all over the place too, and the mean may not even be that. Does that make some sense? So the standard deviation tells you how reliable the sample mean is in predicting the population mean. And that's really important, because if you have data that's not very reliable, then what's the point? Okay? That means that you don't have very good data. Whereas if you have data that's really reliable, then that's very helpful. Okay, it also tells you how similar everybody is. Okay, and that tells you something about people. Any questions on that? Okay, so if I told you, for example, the average score in this class okay, is going to be 79%. Okay. Are there a lot of A's? Are there no A's? Are there just some A's? What do you think?
We can't tell.
You can't tell at all. There could be 50% of the class get an A. Do you see that? Even more. Because maybe you had a third of the class get 10%, and everybody else, you could have a third of the class get 10%, and 2/3 get 91%, which is an A. And then the average is going to be 79%. That would be a very high standard deviation. Do you see that? On the other hand, if everybody got 79%, there's no A's. Is that clear?
Yep.
Because the standard deviation would be 0 because there's no variation from the mean. So you need to know more than the mean to understand the data. But if you know the mean and the standard deviation in combination, you really have a lot of information. Any questions on that idea? Any questions? Okay, so that is the point. And I should probably tell you what really happened in the end is that after analyzing the data, it turned out that Morse was the best candidate.
Who did they have before that?
What's that?
Who did they pick before that without the data?
Well, here's the bad news. It's worse than you think. They had the data, and they didn't pick Morse.
Ow.
And it's because they didn't pick Morse because they actually didn't do it right. And it wasn't corrupt. They weren't a statistics professor. Okay, so they made mistakes. Okay, I'm not going to mention names. They didn't do it on purpose. But what they did is they got my help. So they did the right thing. And the neat thing is I've talked to a lot of people and asked them, who they voted for and why. And a whole bunch of them said they voted for Morse because the Democrats endorsed him. So actually, I feel like I actually make a big difference in the world. Okay, I don't know if she'll win in the end. We're pretty Republican in this area, so there's a good chance Morse is going to lose. But if she wins, I think it might be because of me. So I feel it's because of statistics. So I want to emphasize how important analyzing data is and analyzing it correctly to make the right decisions. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So it's a nice little story, and I thought, it happened this year. This is recent. This isn't something from 10 years ago. She's running in November. We'll find out. And by the way, I don't tell you to vote for, but here's what I will tell you, is that if you're first over 18, you are a citizen and non-felon, you should register to vote and vote. That I can tell you, is that's just part of being part of our society. So if you are allowed to vote, then all of you should vote. Okay. One thing I don't think I told you all is that I was a politician. Do you all know that?
Yep.
Okay. I was a politician for 9 years. And in my first election, I won by 3 votes. So it made a huge difference in just a couple people voting. Right? If you and your friend had changed their vote to Barbara, I didn't win the election.
Were you a representative for a certain district?
I was on the school board. So Lake Tahoe Unified School District School Board, which is an elected position. And then I became president for the whole county.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I did it 9 years. That was enough. Okay. I think that's just philosophically, I think that's enough for a candidate, for a politician. So I walked out. Okay. I walked on really good terms. I'm pretty sure I could have won for the 3rd term if I wanted to. But I thought 9 years was a good amount of time. Okay. So anyway, so I do know politics inside and out in a way, right? I know the mathematics of it, and I also know the ugly part of it as being one. It's not that easy, I promise. So anyway, figured I should let you know about that. So a couple things to note. Again, the data, because you had a 1, 2, or 3, is called quantitative. Now, because you can only choose 1, 2, or 3, and you can't choose, say, 1.732, every real number in between, we call it discrete. Okay, so discrete means you're not able to answer with any fraction in between. You can only choose like whole numbers or maybe only whole numbers and halves. So for example, let me ask you, I'll let you put it in the chat box, and I'm going to ask you to do that sometimes, unless you're driving, by the way. You shouldn't be typing if you're driving. In the chat box, if you can type in how many siblings are in your family, including yourself. So by the way, if you have anything under one, you're just lost because you're in your family. Okay, so I want to let you know how many I got, because mine's different than everyone else's. And that's why I put this in. At least so far that I've looked at. I'm seeing a lot of 2s, some 4s. Look at that, all even numbers. Okay, for me, any guesses? I knew it was going to be different because no one ever has what I've got.
5.
Oh,
1.
4.5.
What?
Mm-hmm. How can that happen?
You're a half sibling.
Yeah, there's Laura, and she's my half sibling.
Cool.
So we're 4.5, but you can't be 4 1/3. So that's still discrete because you could still like list all the possibilities. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's a stepsister. I consider her half a sister. Okay, but she's an important person. She's a whole person, but only half a sister. And then the other siblings are all related by blood. Okay, by full blood. Okay, so anyway, that can happen. But if you ask that, that's still discrete. But let's suppose instead, I'm going to ask you to type this in. And you may need a calculator for this. Exactly how old are you? Now it's going to be hard because you got to have, it might take, and you can guess a little bit if you want to. But let me just tell you something. I am 52.1723 ... years old. Right? What does that mean? What do you know about today?
That it's discrete.
It's not my birthday today.
Well, yeah, because it would be an exact number.
It's not discrete because I could choose, it could be any real number in between.
Oh, yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
So it's not discrete. We call that continuous. So if you're asking for a number and it could be any number in between, so it's something measurable, not just whole numbers. I'm seeing, 21.28, 20.33. Do you see that? Now we're looking at continuous variables. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure how you can be 4 1/3. I know this is advancement in modern science, but a third, I don't think a third can happen. At least not legally. Not without genetic engineering, and you're not allowed to do that. Not with people. Not just that they can change, but continuous variables can be any fraction. Does that make sense? Whereas discrete variables can only be a certain set of a list, and usually whole numbers. But sometimes whole numbers and halves. Whereas continuous variables can be anything. So for example, you don't have to put this one in because you may not want to tell me, but if I asked you what your GPA is that qualitative, discrete, or continuous?
Continuous.
Yeah, that's continuous because you could have a 3.825 GPA. Do you see that? So that includes the decimals in between. Any questions on that? So as I mentioned, qualitative is the least beneficial, but sometimes you have no choice. Okay? So would a GPA of 3.0 be discrete? So it's not the value that matters. It's all possible values that somebody could answer, that anybody can answer. Do you see that? So it's not one person's answer. It's all people in the world's answer. Okay? But if I said, how many siblings do you have? You're not going to have millions and millions of answers that are different. You're only going to have 20 or so total. Do you see that?
Yep.
So So it's not one person, it's everybody's answers. And you list them all, and if that list is infinite, basically we call it continuous. It's a little more detailed than that, but for this class, it's good enough. Any questions on that? Okay, so that's discrete versus continuous. And in particular with the qualitative, there's a special type that you're going to see all the time, and it's not fancy or anything. And that is, if I asked you, for example, do you live in Lake Tahoe?
Yes.
What would your answer be?
No.
No, or what's the other choice? What's another choice besides no?
Yes.
Yes, good. Not a hard question. I told you this isn't supposed to be hard. Okay? The yes-no question is really important because you'll see that on survey questions a lot. And the only statistic you really get from the yes-no question is proportion. The proportion of yeses or the proportion of no's. Okay? You can multiply by 100 and call it a percent, but that's the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're asking a discrete or a continuous survey question, then there's lots of statistics. There's the average, which is a mean. There's the standard deviation. Can you tell me some other statistics that could happen? So numbers that are interesting about the whole data set. Not hearing. I'll give you one, and I bet you can give me another one. How about the maximum? The highest value.
Are you talking
Can you give me
about
another one?
stuff?
Huh?
Are you talking about range?
Huh?
The minimum.
The range is another one. Yep. The minimum is another one. Okay. There's some others that you probably learned in 4th grade. Should I tell you? The median.
Oh,
The mode.
Do you remember the median? Who remembers what the
Yeah.
median means?
The middle number.
The middle number or the middle of the two numbers if there's a tie for middle number.
Yeah.
So if you ask, say, 10 people, then there's 2 in the middle. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you have an even number of numbers, it's the 2 middle ones, and you take the average of those. And that's the median. Okay? And then there's a whole lot more statistics. Okay? There is the first quartile. The first quartile is very much like the idea of the median, except the median cuts the data in half, right? Now if you take that bottom half and you take the median of that, that's basically the first quartile. Okay, if you're below the first quartile, you're in that bottom 25th percentile. Okay, there's the third quartile, which is the same thing except the other way around. And that is you look at the data and you say, well, take the top half, take the median of that, that's the third quartile. Any questions on that? Okay, those are statistics you may have heard before.
can you say that one again? I'm sorry.
The third quartile is just like the first quartile, but you take the median, you look at the top half, so above the median, you take a median of that, and that's the third quartile. So it means
Okay.
it's 75% below it.
Got it.
So we've cut it into 4s. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so these are a bunch of statistics, right? That must be important because that's the name of the class, right? So there's a bunch of statistics, and there's a whole lot more of them. We'll get them as the class goes that you have probably never heard of before, unless you've taken this before. Things like the p-value. Just trust me, that's going to be really important in this class, but not for another 5 weeks or so. The quartile is used to kind of understand whether you're in a large category. So let me give you an example, okay? And percentile, like the first quartile is the 25th percentile. So for example, I got an 1170 on my SAT when I took it. Got it? Did I do well?
Wow.
What do you think?
Yeah.
1170. Do you have any idea? My daughter got a 2050. Who did better? Who did better?
Oh,
If
me.
you do the same
Well,
test,
didn't
I got 1,170. She got 2,050. Who did better?
if it was the same test, she did better.
Right, but it wasn't. Obviously, I hope it's obvious to you. My daughter's a lot younger than me, right? Because she's my daughter. Okay? It was a different era. Okay? So knowing the score tells you nothing. Right?
Right.
Okay? But if I told you I got a 97th percentile on the SAT score, now what does that tell you?
What did she get?
Okay, what does that tell you about my score?
Okay.
Did I do well or not?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. She got a 98th percentile. So who did better?
Wow, she did.
She did a little better. Not much better, but she did a little better than me. And that makes me happy, actually. You want your kid to do better, right?
Right.
If you got kids, right? Or when you get kids, you'll see. But as you might guess, my math was a little better than hers. Not that much. She did really well in math, too. But my math was very good, as you might guess. What brought me down was my English. And I wasn't terrible, but it wasn't as good as she. Okay, so quartiles are like that. If you're at the first quartile, that means you're pretty low. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you say what the score was, it doesn't tell you much. Is that clear?
Yep.
Any questions on that? Okay, so that's a really good question. Is what do these things tell you? And that's what these tell you. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so I want to show you a little about standard deviation and share my desktop for another reason. Why do you care about the standard deviation? Who might care about a standard deviation? Any thought? So let me click something, and that'll give you a bigger hint. If you really looked at my desktop, you might have guessed, but now let's click here. Okay, what is this?
Oh, money market.
Yeah, this is Market Watch. Have you ever seen a site like this?
Yeah.
And the nice thing about this is you can go and you can look at any particular stock, and you can look at how it's done over the last however. This is one day. Let me go more than a day. One day is not that interesting. Let's go 3 years. This is Apple. You probably all heard of that company.
Whew.
Okay, so here's Apple. So you'll notice, what has it done, by the way, recently? Or not recently, but in the last 3 years.
It's gone up.
It's gone up. Okay, not a big surprise. Most of the stock market has gone up. Okay, so we know it's gone up, but you want to hear more than that. One is you can look at this chart. This is a chart, for example, and we can talk about, this is actually what we call skewed right. It means the high stuff is over to the right. I'm sorry, the skewed left is what I meant. I got it backwards. I apologize. The skewed left, it means the high stuff is to the right, and kind of the low frequency stuff or low stuff is to the right. To the left. Keep saying it backwards. Sorry about that. Okay, so the left is where low frequencies are, not much, and then the right is where high stuff is. Okay, now you see there's ups and downs. In the stock market, what do you call ups and downs? Anyone know the word?
Inflation and the other one.
It's a good try. It's not quite inflation. It starts with a V. Anyone know? Volatility. Have you heard of that word before? And what's another word for volatility in our class? I've said it a bunch of times already today.
Just a second.
The hint is it is on the chat.
It is.
Yeah, Elliot got it. Standard deviation. So standard deviation tells you the ups and downs, right? Has it just kind of stayed about the same the whole time, or is it going up and down and up and down? Okay, does that make sense? So if you have, for example, a stock that hasn't changed much in terms of average, but has high volatility, can you make money?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll let you know, I have made quite a lot of money. Okay. And not a lot compared to, say, Bezos or something like that. I'm not a billionaire, but definitely in many, many thousands of dollars on understanding volatility.
Wow.
Because if I see that you have a stable stock in terms of its price, but it's volatile over time, in other words, a high standard deviation, then I buy when it's low, I sell when it's high, then I wait, and I buy again when it's low, and I sell when it's high. Do you see how that works?
Mm-hmm.
And guess what happens to me?
You get which?
I make money. I make money. And you don't even have to have that much to make money, but I want to kind of show you why you care about some of these things. If it has a very low standard deviation, that means it doesn't go up and down, right? Your heart rate might not go up so much because you don't get nervous because your money's not going up and down and up and down. But you're not going to be able to play the day trading. You see how that works?
Yeah.
So if you want something that's real stable, then you want something with a low standard deviation. If you want something that goes up and down, you want a high standard deviation. So again, it depends what you're looking for. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so if you don't have funds to back yourself up, you better not borrow money and then buy stock if it has a high volatility, because it could go down a lot, and then all of a sudden you can't afford it and you're in trouble. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And maybe you don't have time to wait till it goes up again. So I like to kind of tell you why statistics is important. Do you agree that's pretty important? I don't know, any of you business majors? Okay, Lauren is. Okay. The business majors should care a lot about this one. Business majors should definitely care. I think I'm going to need. Not that one. Let's see who can be muted, because we're getting some feedback. All right, no more feedback. Good, I think. Okay, any questions about standard deviation? Okay, let's do one in real time about you guys. And I have a rule when I ask you a survey question. You have to answer, put it in the chat box, or if you're driving, you can say it, because I don't want anyone getting in an accident because of me. You have to answer, but you don't have to tell the truth, but if you do lie, it should be reasonable. So if I ask you how old you are, don't say I'm 950 years old, because I just want to be able to put data in. Sound good? Okay, but don't lie unless you really feel like you have to. Okay, first let me ask you, is anything you want to know about each other? It has to be quantitative. Hopefully you remember what that is. If there's something you're curious about,
I am.
Do a new share, and I'm going to go to the calculator. Uh-oh.
Oh, no, my.
Do this. Lost it. Just a minute. Let me unshare. And let me go back to the calculator. I want to get it on the right side.
How can the last 4 digits of pi be 4 digits when it's 3.14? Now it's driving me
Oh,
crazy.
pi's not 3.14. It's 3.14159265835.
Oh, my God.
Tell me what the last ones are. If you can tell me the last ones, you got my PIN number. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen, because now I'm on the correct side. Otherwise, I can't see chat and stuff at the same time. Okay. So I didn't see anything that you guys were interested in saying. All right, so let me ask you, maybe I'll ask something about yourselves. So for how many months have you been a college student? Okay. By the way, none of you are going to say, 0, because you're a college student now or you wouldn't be in class. So I want to show you how you do this in the calculator, really important. So again, you need to have a statistics calculator. And this is kind of what one looks like, although it's made for showing it on the screen. So yours will look like the left-hand side, not the right-hand side. So what you do is you go to Stat. If you have your calculator with you, you follow along with me and do it so that you learn to do it. Then hit Enter for edit. I need to get rid of what's in L1. So I go up to L1, and I hit the clear button. And then I hit Enter. I want to give you a very important warning. Never touch DEL when you're on this screen. Can you remember that? If you hit delete instead of clear, better have Kleenex because you're going to be crying. What you've just done is destroyed your calculator.
Oh.
And fixing it is really hard. I could do it for you. It's really hard.
Can
What
you
you've
just
just
hit the
done is
reset
great.
button?
Huh?
Can you hit the reset button on the back?
Yeah, that's one way. You can hit the reset. You can also reprogram it. But if you reset it, you lost everything you've ever done. So there's issues. Don't hit that DEL key. I love this calculator, but I hate the fact that the DEL is easy to touch. Okay, so once you have cleared, not deleted, cleared the data, it's very easy. So I'm just looking. Okay, 44 months. This is Stormy, so you just type in 44 and hit enter. Got it? And then 13, enter, 26, 24, enter, 26, enter, 24, enter, 36, enter. Anyone else? Another 36. Enter. 144. Enter. Any others want to chime in? Okay. So we now have our data in, and it's into L1. Your calculator looks similar. Then I hit the stat button again. Okay, then I hit the right arrow key under calc. I want to calculate the statistics. I hit enter under one var stats. Okay, unfortunately, Texas Instruments did an evil thing a bunch of years ago. They changed the calculator like mid-production. So the newer TI-84s look like this. The TI-83s, when you hit enter, you're going to see one var stats. And that's all you're going to see. If you have the older type, you hit second one and then enter. And that'll give you what you need. Got it? If you have the newer type, it'll look like mine, and I'll show you what to do. So the older type is what I have in my kind of archived videos. But the newer type, you make sure it says L1. If you don't, you go second one, enter. Freak list, ignore. So just hit the down button and hit enter on calculate. Any questions so far?
I'm still putting numbers in.
Okay. Yeah, don't worry about putting all the numbers in because I don't really care about the numbers that much. I just want to care that you know how to do this and how to interpret it.
Are we going to be calculating standard deviation from scratch at all?
Never.
Or like just square rooting and squaring?
No. No. It's nobody does that. So why should I make you do that? But what you need to understand is how to interpret the standard deviation. I told you there's a lot of writing in this class. So I'm going to make you write things like that. Interpret the standard deviation. You know, what action might you take after seeing the standard deviation? Right? Does that make sense?
Okay, push the arrow to the right, and what it would do?
If you did arrow to the right, you're probably on
Yep.
calc, hit enter.
Yep.
Then make sure it says L1. Go down to calculate and hit enter. Okay, so I want to give you how to read the important things on this screen. The very first one is this X, and you see the little bar on top? The formal mathematical word for that is X bar. Easy one to remember, right? So X bar is 43.375. That is the average. Okay, just note, if you use the symbol X bar, that means you're considering this average to be an average of a sample. If you're considering instead to be the average of the population, we don't use X bar, and I think it allows me to do this. You use, can you see what I'm writing? Can you all see that in red?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it's not just me looking. Okay, that's a Greek letter. Anyone know how to read that letter? Anyone have a cat? What's a cat sound like?
Meow.
Yeah, pretty close. Mine sounds like mew. And that's how you read this letter. It's mu.
Meow.
And that's the Greek letter mu. Got it?
Mhm.
So if you're considering it as a population mean, we use the Greek letter mu. If you're considering as a sample mean, we use X bar. The formula is the same, so the calculator doesn't have to show you both of them because you should understand which one you're considering it as. Does that make sense? So if you're considering it the average of the people here, then it's mu. If you're thinking about the people here as a sample of the entire class, then it's X bar. Does that make sense? The next two we'll never use in this class, so don't worry about it. But this third one, that is very important. And here's a hint. It's S. The X isn't very important. The S is important. S is the first letter of what I said is one of the most important words in this whole class. 2 words, actually. Which is?
The
Standard deviation.
Standard deviation, yeah. So the word standard starts with an S, so they use S. The X is, most people don't use X, this calculator just does. So you just call it S, is what most people call it. So S is 41.7644. Notice that's very large, right? We have 43 as X bar. Standard deviation is like almost as big as the average. What that tells you is there's some wide fluctuations in our data, which we can see because we had Sally who said 144. Do you see that? So when you have one number that's much bigger than the rest or much smaller than the rest, we have a name for that. Does anyone know the name? I haven't talked about it yet, but you still might know. Anyone know what you call it if it's very far from all the rest of the numbers? You call it an outlier. Have you heard of that before?
No.
Okay, now you've heard it, and you do need to know that. So it's called an outlier if it's very far from all the rest. So outliers strongly affect the mean and strongly affect the standard deviation. Okay? So for example, if you want to look at, say, what are house prices in Tahoe? Now, you may or may not know what Tahoe's like, but I will tell you. There's my house, which is a pretty normal house. Okay, and there's a lot of houses like my house. But then there's that house on the lake with 6 acres that goes for $45 million. Okay, and we do have houses like that. It's not my house, by the way. So that is an outlier, and that will strongly influence the mean. So if you do want those outliers included, the mean is what you want. So for example, tax revenue. If you want to look at the mean, if you're interested in tax revenue, because that outlier is putting a lot of money into the tax base. Does that make sense? Okay, or if you have a fundraiser with a whole lot of people in, I'm on the Boys and Girls Club board, for example, and we have a fundraiser coming up. That outlier is the person that's going to give $1 million when everyone else is going to give 50. Guess what you really care about? The $1 million. Does that make sense? So that outlier is really important because it influences the mean and you care about the mean. On the other hand, if you don't want that outlier to really change everything, like if you just wanted to find out what the typical house is, which is my house, then the median is better. And the median is not influenced by outliers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so whether you choose the mean or the median as your main statistic depends on whether you want outliers to influence or you don't want outliers to influence. Do you want the typical value or the average value? Do you see the difference?
So my 144 is so outlier, so they would just do the median between the two, kind of dumping me just to make sure that, you know, that they get the absolute average. Since mine is above average, obviously.
Not the absolute average. You want the median, not the absolute value average.
Yeah.
The absolute value average is our 43. You see that?
No, but I meant the median. Yeah,
Yeah, but I want to correct you because the average is usually used for the mean.
Okay.
Okay, but we're going to use the mean so that there's no question about it. So if you want the typical student, then yeah, you're probably gonna use the median, and we're going to see in a minute the median is much lower. So that's the next value. Sigma sub x. So this is a Greek letter.
Greg,
This
turn
is the
off
Greek
your
letter
mic.
sigma. The weird thing is, this letter here is also the Greek letter sigma. But just like in English, there's capital sigma and lowercase sigma. Just like we have capital and small lowercase, and they look different. Yeah, let's see if I can turn off Greg's microphone. Where is it? There we go. I actually have the ability to mute. Yeah, so if you're not talking, mute yourself so that we don't get feedback. But please talk if you want to talk. Okay? By the way, there's no background behind me. I'm in my office. It's quiet in here. Okay, so sigma sub x, or sigma is what we're going to be using in this class, is still the standard deviation, but it turns out it's the population standard deviation. So if you're considering it as a population, then use sigma. If you're considering it as a sample, use S. Notice these actually are a little different. The formulas are different for the population and sample. You don't need to understand that. The details of why they're different is way too hard for this class. So I'm going to do that a lot, and I'm going to tell you the hard math we're going to shove under the carpet and not worry about. Are you okay with that? Okay, what you do have to know is which is which. That sigma corresponds to the population and S corresponds to the sample for the standard deviation.
So Larry,
Yeah.
would in general the population be lower as a number?
Actually, yes. And that's because there's an n minus 1 in the denominator for the population, and there's an n in the denominator for the population, and n minus 1 for the sample. And if you have a bigger denominator, you get a smaller number.
Yeah.
Okay? But you don't have to memorize the formulas. I don't want you to do that because there's more important things to do. There's a lot of information in this class. So I'm not going to get into the formulas, but more importantly, you have to know that there's a difference so you actually type in the right one, especially on the computer when you do the computer assignments, because if you type in the wrong one, it's going to mark you wrong because it's going to look at your number and say, that's not right. Does that make sense? Okay, N is 8. That one I'm hoping you all know what that is. What do you think 8 is?
Number of items.
Yeah, number of items, which we call the sample size. So it just means 8 people answer the question. Okay, very easy. We'll always use the letter N for that. I'm hoping you can all tell me what MIN means.
Minimum.
Yeah, that's the minimum. Okay, that means the student who has been a college student the lowest number of months has been at college 13, which is actually a lot more than I thought. Usually minimum is 1 month in fall. I usually get a new student. So all of you are veteran college students. So that's interesting. Q1. Here's a hint. Q is the first letter of something I've already talked about today.
Quantitative. Qualitative.
That's a good try, but it's,
Quantitative. Quantitative.
but quantitative is a word, not something that represents a number.
Oh.
Another Q1. I didn't even think about that one. I guess I've said a few things that start with Q.
Quotient.
One starts with Q. It was a good try. A really good try. And remember?
Quotient.
Quotient. I haven't talked about that yet. All right, maybe I should say it. Yeah, there we go. Natalie gets it, and Casey got it. Quartile. So Q1 is the first quartile. So that means basically 25% are below 24 years, have been here fewer than 24 months.
Yeah.
Any questions on that?
No.
If I hit the down arrow, I think I need to unannotate. I think I can do that. There. If I hit the down arrow, any guess on what MED stands for?
Median.
That's the median. So notice, as I mentioned, the median was 31. The mean, I think, was 43. Was that right?
Yeah.
The median is a lot lower because we had one outlier, and the outliers affect the mean and don't affect the median. Any questions on that? Okay. And then Q3. Q3 is 40. Any guess on what that is? Here's the hint. Q1 was 24. That was the first quartile.
Oh, it's third quartile.
Yeah, the third quartile is 40. Okay. In between 24 and 40, we see the range of that is 16. Okay, 40 minus 24 is 16. Okay, you're always allowed a calculator. I do everything in my head, but you don't have to. So the range of that is 16. We have a name for the range of Q1 to Q3, and it's called the interquartile range. And what that does is it represents the middle 50% of the data. So, for example, in advertising, the middle 50% is usually your target if you just want a lot of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you want to advertise to the middle 50%, then you look at the interquartile range. And you say, oh, we got a range of 16. Is that big or is that small? Can I target advertise, or do I have to do more of a broad-based advertisement? Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep.
So one of the things you're going to be responsible for doing is be able to answer questions in words and writing and understand what that means. To be able to say, hey, this is the middle, this is how we use the interquartile range. Does that make sense? Okay, and I think there's one more, of course. And I hope you all understand what MAX stands for.
Maximum.
That's the maximum. Okay, so the maximum is the biggest number that happened in the data set. Any questions on that?
On my behalf, I have 3 degrees.
What's that?
I said on my behalf, I have 3 degrees.
No, that's fine. If I asked everyone who is on this line, it would be a lot more than 144. How come?
That's good.
Any guess?
Because you've done more as well.
Yeah, because I'm a lot older than all of you, and I started when I was 18 years old. Actually, I was 17, now that I think of it, because I took a summer class in between high school and college. And I told you I don't know if you remember my birthday, but I told you by dates, it's in July. So I was a college student just before that birthday.
July what?
So anyway, I've been a college student I was a college student a long, long time ago. So I would be the super outlier. And 12 years is nothing. Any questions on this? Okay, I want to talk about one more highlight, and this is more in chapter 1, but it's a really important thing. And I'll go back to what I started with, and that was that idea when we talked about that sampling. Okay? So we had a sample of people to decide who the Democratic Party should endorse, right? And the bad thing is we got those people, which was like 50-something people. It was a good number. Maybe it was 40-something. I can look and see. But whatever it was. But the problem with it is we only surveyed the people who happened to come to the forum. What's the problem with that?
People that have to look after their kids couldn't come, so...
Yeah, well, a lot of people couldn't come, but more importantly, you end up with a very special kind of person. Instead of a good representation of all Democrats in the 5-county region. Does that make sense? You only get a certain type of person. And when you do that, yeah, it's usually a very dedicated voter. And by the way, any guess on what I'm doing tomorrow evening?
Another one of these.
There's a forum tomorrow in Tahoe. You're welcome to come. It's at the beach retreat, and it's for the County Board of Supervisors. And I'm going to that because I like to be informed. I want to make sure I'm voting for the right person. So I want to hear from them. Okay, so I'm going to that, and you're all welcome to go. It's open. And I'm going to ask them if they can share me their data if they're going to do a survey. I don't know if they can do a survey or not, though. So the problem with these things is you only get a certain type of people. And you get the kind of person who goes to this forum. And that is what's called biased. You end up with a group that does not necessarily represent the population. And the sampling that happens is called convenience sampling. In other words, we just asked who happened to be there. Does that make sense? Very convenient. So now I have a question. This is a very hard question, by the way. Let's suppose that you wanted to get a sample let's go California because I know you're from all over the place. Sorry, we got one person from Australia, and it's too hard to go there. It's a long flight. No offense, but it's a long flight.
It really is.
But let's suppose you wanted to get a sample of, let's say, 500 Californians to find out how they feel, because there's a referendum that might be coming up on the ballot about getting rid of bail bonds. I don't know if you know about that, but Governor Brown just signed an initiative to get rid of bail bonds completely. So there's no more bail. Now everyone gets out. And so now there's going to be a new referendum on the ballot to get rid of bail bonds. And we want to find out how people think about it. We don't want to wait till after the election. We want to do that in the next 3 weeks so that we can, maybe as a news station, to find out. So how do you collect a survey of 1,000 Californian voters so that you don't have all of that bias? How might you do that? Any thoughts?
Random sampling.
Okay, so that would be awesome. Okay, do you know what the word random means?
Anybody?
Okay, so let me define random, and then we'll see why you can't do it. Okay, it'd be great if you could. Random means that we get a list of every Californian that can vote. Then we use a computer, because really that's the only way to feasibly do it. And out of that list, we let the computer select 1,000 people. Then we go and we make sure that every single person on that list answers your survey question. Why is that not feasible?
Not all of them are going to vote.
It's not about vote.
Some might not respond to the survey.
Yeah, and I see old school Dan.
Sedan. It's not Dan.
That telephone calls, because that might be how you try it, right? What's the problem? So let me ask you, say yes if you have ever gotten a call from someone doing a survey and not answered their survey, and no if you've always answered their survey. So yes if you've ever gotten a call and not answered. Okay,
Yes.
Guess what just happened?
Yes.
We got a lot of not answered. Old school Dan always answers. So guess what? It's biased. It's not random. Because you're going to call these people and most of them are going to not even answer you. Do you see the problem?
Yeah.
And maybe you can go door to door, but that's just as bad. A lot of people won't answer the door. I learned when I go door to door, I always bring my bicycle helmet, I bike ride. Okay? And something I learned, because remember I campaigned, I was a politician. You're much more likely to get a random sample if you have a bicycle helmet in your hand. That's not math, by the way. That's called experience. Okay? Don't ask me why. People trust you if you've ridden your bike and walked in with the bike helmet and knocked on their door. Okay? Okay? I have no idea what's going on, but I definitely am not a psychologist. Okay? But you learn. Okay, but still, a lot of people don't answer. Okay, so the problem is random sampling is usually impossible. It's best if you can, but you usually can't do it. Okay, so if you can't randomly sample, let's hear some other strategies on how you might want to sample so that you have as little bias as possible. Any thoughts?
Makes me feel complete. That's fine. Sorry.
Any thoughts? And if I don't hear any, I'll give you some ideas. Okay, so here's one way. One way is you say, well, what might cause bias? Well, you might have, say, maybe Democrats might be overrepresented. Maybe Democrats are more likely to answer the phone. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, and in fact, that's what we found out 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago. What was the most important survey that happened 2 years ago? Got to think back.
Trump.
Yeah, the Trump versus Clinton survey, right? 2 years ago, we didn't know who was going to win. What did they all say?
Hillary.
Yeah, they all say Hillary. And that's what happened is because there was bias in the surveying. Okay, I called it a little bit, but not perfectly, a couple years ago. But I definitely saw bias. People who voted for Trump were also much more likely to hang up the phone when they got a question, a survey question. So one way of doing it is you want to make sure that you have made sure at least there's no bias on political affiliation. So the first thing you do is, and you can do this online, you can find out what percentage of people are registered Democrat, what percent are registered Republican, and what percent are, say, other. Any questions on that? So let's suppose 42% were registered Democrat, 30% were registered Republican, and so that gives you 72, so that means 28% are other. Does that make sense? So then you take 1,000, because that's your goal, is to get 1,000 people to answer your survey. You multiply it by 42%, which gives you 420. Okay? The exact, calculations, don't worry about, the fact that I did in my head and you can't, don't worry about that. The process is what matters, is you take what your desired sample size, you multiply it by the proportion for each category, and that is your established quota. So that's how many of each category you must end up sampling. And if you've got 420 people who already answer your question, they're Democrat, and the next person is Democrat, you don't even take their answer. By doing that, you have made sure that there is no bias based on political affiliation. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. When surveys are done, that is the #1 way people do surveys to prevent bias. And that's called stratified sampling. Can you remember that? It's in the video, it's on the book, it's all over the place, but that's an important one.
And that's kind of what the Gallup polls are, right?
Gallup poll is stratified, yep. Gallup poll is stratified. And they have voluntary response bias. Voluntary response bias is the hang up on the phone, which is certain kind of person hangs up, certain kind of person answers the question. Very hard not to have voluntary response bias. How do you avoid voluntary response bias? There's only a couple ways of doing that. Any thoughts? So let me give you a situation that happened. It was a bunch of years ago, but it happened. It was like a really good day. I got one of those calls. But before they started the survey, they said, we'll give you $100 if you participate in this study. And they said they were from it was a government agency. I don't think should I tell you? Nah, I don't think I want to tell you that agency, but it was a respectable agency, so I knew it wasn't some kind of phishing scheme or something like that. Okay? And guess what I did? You think I answered the survey?
Yep.
Absolutely. That was like the easiest $100 I ever made. Would you have answered the survey? Especially those of you who would have hung up otherwise. You say you hang up?
I would have hung up.
You would have hung up even if they had $100?
I don't know. It'd have to be a super reputable place. I get 8 to 10 phone calls a day.
No, but this one's reputable.
Maybe they'd call you back with more money.
No, they don't need to. This one's reputable. And by the way, on the caller ID, it showed their name, so I knew that it showed their agency. So I knew they were that people.
I might have.
Really? Maybe you're really rich, so you don't need $100. But I'll take the $100. And it wasn't even a long survey. So anyway, that helps reduce voluntary response bias. There's one other way of reducing voluntary response bias. And they do this at colleges. Let's suppose you wanted to survey let's say 1,000 college students in California. And you wanted to not have voluntary response bias. The problem with doing some kind of random thing is it's too hard to go to all the colleges, right?
1,000's a lot.
1,000's a lot, but you have some money, so you can make it happen, and you can do a little traveling, but not you can't go to 200 colleges, but maybe you can go to 10 colleges. So what you can do is you can go to classrooms, and you can have the professor ask the students to fill out the survey. Okay, now you said you hang up on the phone if you get a call and they ask you to fill out a survey. What if you're in class, whether it's online right now in our kind of class that we did, or you're sitting in a classroom, and the professor hands out a survey to you and says, fill it out. Will you fill it out?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, everything changes in that situation. So voluntary response bias is gone. So if you go into, say, let's say 30 classrooms that have a variety of types, so maybe a night class, an online class, some day classes, make sure you got some transfer classes, you got some more of CTE classes, career tech classes. So you got a variety of classes, and then you ask every person in each of those classes. They're all going to be able to respond because they're not going to hang up because professor makes it happen. One of the interesting things, there's some kind of pressure going on, even though it's not like you're going to lose grades or anything, but you just do it. It's a social thing. Then we call that cluster sampling. And cluster sampling is also a very widely used way of sampling. Does that make sense?
So cluster sampling makes it unbiased.
Well, it doesn't. There's always some bias. It's impossible to get all bias out of there. So, for example, if you cluster sampled, even let's say I asked you to do, and I will, by the way, not let's say, I'm going to ask you to do a sample of over 30. So, let's say you do 35 students, and you ask you went to 3 LTCC classes. Okay, small classes. Okay, even if you, let's say, did 200 of them, you went to 10 LTC classes, and you did some night classes here, you did some online classes here, day classes, you did some CTE classes. Why do I know for sure you're not going to have an unbiased sample? And you'll guess? Most of you have no idea, by the way. Just say no.
No.
Okay, there's a group of students you can't ask. Do you know what group that is? Yep.
Suspended students?
They're not students anymore if they're suspended.
The DRC.
No, they're sitting in class. They'll answer. No one's answered. I didn't think anyone's going to get this one. We have what's called the incarcerated student program.
Oh.
What does it take to ask them? You have to be in prison.
I didn't want to say that out loud.
I'm hoping none of you are in prison right now. Actually, if you were, you'd be in the incarcerated student program. And by the way, we do have a statistics class in the incarcerated student program. Okay? And you're going to miss that group. So even with cluster sampling, you're going to have some bias. Because there's sometimes groups you can't get to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay? It's almost impossible to have no bias. But cluster is a good way, and they use it a lot. And especially if you can do it and not have a voluntary response. By the way, not all surveys have to be people. So for example, I have worked with the forestry and done some consulting work with the forestry. And I look at their data and I help them make sure they do their statistics right. And they do things like measure the amount of dissolved nitrates in all of the different lakes and rivers in our basin. Okay? There's no voluntary response bias. I've never gone to a creek and the creek says, you can't talk to me. I can measure them. Does that make sense? So I just want to let you know that not all studies are done on people. So there's different issues for different things. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, I want to give you one more example before we call it a night. And that example is something that came up. I had a former student, and he had a major hotel towel manufacturing business. Okay? So if it sounds boring, it's a true story, so that's why it may not be that exciting, but it was neat to me because it was my student. And he wanted to show that his towels were better than the ones made in China. This was a major industry, and his plant had a major plant. Hundreds of thousands of towels are being made in his plant. And he wanted to study, or I helped him actually. So we had to study 100 towels to find out how they did, for example, if they were put in the washer a bunch of times versus the ones made in China. So which 100 towels do you pick? How do you choose? And they're all white, boring hotel towels. So how do you pick towels? Any thoughts?
Get 1,000 and then randomly get number them and then randomly get 100 of them.
Well, they're not numbered, so random is pretty hard. And he didn't want to spend the time labeling every towel.
Yeah.
So he did a different kind of sample. Okay, what he did is he had like 100,000 towels. So he picked every 1,000th towel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called systematic sampling.
Like the car example.
Yeah, exactly. It works really well in business if you have a manufacturing plant, because you can actually order everything. If you can't order everything, you can't do systematic. So if you can order, and for people it's pretty hard because people say no. Towels don't say no. So then he went and he took those 100 towels, threw it in the wash a bunch of times, measured how they did with all kinds of little standards. I let him choose how you measure the standards because I have no idea. I'm not a towel expert. But I helped him understand how to collect the data, because if he just collected a bunch of towels, the problem is they might have been made by the same person. You see that? Who happened to be working that day. And that person could be awesome, and then you end up having perfect towels. Or maybe that person is like not so good. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's done in manufacturing a lot. It can be done in other places. All right, so I have one last thing to say. What do I need to say?
Oh, the secret.
Goodbye.
Secret word.
Yeah, the secret word. So the secret word I have for today, see if I can, it's hard to write. You're going to learn why I type everything. Because I don't have great handwriting and I'm using a mouse. If you can guess, I'm not all done yet, but I'm getting close.
Survey.
Survey. So the secret word of the day is survey. So you're all going to want to go to the secret word quiz for week 1. It's going to ask you one question, and what are you going to put in?
Survey.
Survey. And you'll get 100%. Okay? If you forget and don't do it by Sunday, you got a 5-page paper to write. So do it today. It's not very hard. This is not much to ask. Okay? And it's just to show that you watched the video. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to unshare my desktop. One thing is that way the word survey is not there anymore. Whoops, I don't want to share. I want to go just, for now, I'll share. I want to stop share. Oops. Let me go find it. So, we're going to stop share. Sorry.
X out.
I'm going to hit that X. There we go. Oh, that did work. See, I couldn't stop share because I had the little marker on. Okay, there we go. So now, what I do at the end, remember I told you at the orientation what I do at the very end of every webinar? We're at 1 hour and 23 minutes, and I always try and make it between an hour and a half, so I did it. But now is the time I don't care if it goes longer. What do we do now?
Q&A, live Q&A.
Q&A. So the idea here, you've got all the information you need. I gave you all highlights. You still should read the chapter or watch the long video, but you got highlights. So if you have any questions, this is a great time to ask. You can talk. You can put in your chat box, whatever it takes. You could also say, good night. It was great.
Larry, this isn't necessarily related to today's class, but I was wondering how to get onto the discussion part where I can ask everyone in the class how to get a partner. And
That's a really important question. But I want to answer, I'm looking at the chat box too. If you missed the orientation, then you do need to write a 5-page essay. Most people made it, a few didn't. Otherwise, you get dropped from the class. So please do that. Okay, and just email it to me and that'll count, and I'll check you off. It could be double. It could be double space. That's fine, but you need to write. Okay, so in the discussions, and then I'll show you in a bit. And actually, I'll show you because that's how you get to discussions. essay is due, has to be done by Friday at noon. Okay, I don't check for grammar. Okay, so you don't need to worry too much about that. But, you know, use capital I instead of lowercase I for I. You can do some things. Okay, so let me share my desktop because I do have this. And that is under, I think that was that one. Okay, so here's, and let me go back to the chat so I can read as you're typing. There it is. Okay, so how many responses should students should we have for the discussions? Okay, so there's actually, for almost all of them, if I click discussion, so this answers everybody's question. One is, how do you get to discussions? You click discussions. Got it? And those are the discussions. So that's one way. There's a lot of ways to get to discussion. That's one way, quickest way. So the project discussion is right here. Click it. And you'll see a lot of people have already asked and gotten partners. You see that? So we're in there. So post or answer someone else's post saying, I want to be your partner. And hopefully that can work. So let me hit discussions again so I get to general discussions. Q&A. There's been 2 questions with the same question, which was the secret word. I bet you don't have a question about that anymore, I hope, right? Okay, you know how to get the secret word because that happened tonight. And then I answered it. Okay, it did take me some hours. Remember I told you that Monday, Wednesday, Friday I'm teaching most of the day, so it did take me 3.5 hours or so to get back to you. Sorry about that. But that's not, oh no, sorry, 4.5 hours. But it was much less than a day. Okay, so now the next question is, how about how many responses do you have to make in the assignments? So the first is for the 2 truths, 1 untruth. At least 1, more than 1's even better, just to be nice to everyone. Another question, the webinar is always going to be around Wednesday, around this time. The answer is no. Okay, so first again, for this discussion, you can answer everybody's if you want. It's really easy to answer. You just think, number 2 is false. That's it, very simple. So answer, if you see someone that hasn't been answered, just be polite and answer because nobody wants to be unanswered. That's kind of depressing. So just answer their question, answer their post. Okay. If you want to find out when the webinar is going to be, here's what you do. In the Q&A forum, hit reply and make a request. I try to make it Monday and Tuesday are the best days because that way you have time. That way you have time to answer the questions, okay, and to do all the work. Only an hour update to log on. I'm usually not around on my computer. Can we get a bit more? Even a bit more time? So I don't want, I've learned that if I go for 3 hours, your concentration is probably not going to last. Oh, time to be notified. Okay. I usually notify on Thursday. Is that enough time? Stormy? Yeah, the Thursday before. So I'll notify you today's Wednesday. I'll notify you tomorrow for it'll be Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, something like that. Is that enough time for you? Okay, yeah, so I usually do Thursday, sometimes Friday morning if there looks like some discussion or something going on. But usually I try and do it on Thursday. So if you have a request, post a request. I'd like to see it Monday at 6. Okay, and if you're the only one that put it there, and I'm free, which I am this week, for example, or next week, I'll say, great, Monday at 6. If there's 7 people and they all have different times, then I'll do my best to make it. But if you request, you have to come. That's all. So if you say Monday at 6, you better be there Monday at 6 if I end up making it Monday at 6. Okay, but you do it by Q&A forum, and I'll make it happen. Any questions on that? Okay, let me continue on the question of how many should you answer? So the two truths, untruths, you can answer everyone's. The survey design, answer exactly one. Because if you answer two, then someone else isn't going to be able to answer. Does that make sense? So you should answer exactly one, and do it deeply. Think about it. You can ask questions if you're not sure how to answer, but answer one. And answer somebody who hasn't already been answered. Okay. The other thing is you'll notice that I'll make some comments if I couldn't find it. So for example, Julian posted something and I wasn't able to find where they discussed the data collection. So I actually wrote that saying, if it is there, please help people, because if I can't find it, that's a problem. And if it's not there, you need to repost a different answer so other people can answer Does that make sense? Yeah, so 2 posts in all. 2 posts in all for all the rest of the discussions, except for all the rest of them that involve statistics. There's one more that is more of just conversation, not necessarily involving statistics, but that's a different week, a while from now. So 2 posts in all for this one and beyond. Okay? But there's going to be a bunch of posts for the just the fun one. Any other questions?
Can I have a private thing with you tomorrow sometime about a couple things?
Yeah, I don't have official office hours. My schedule, I know for sure. I have, this is going to be horrible. I'm going to have 2 screens going with 2 different webinars for 2 different things I'm supposed to go to. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle that or not. I may have to just do one. And that's noon to 1, so I can't help you noon to 1. So I can help you before noon or after 1. At 3:30, I believe, I also have a meeting. And then at 5:30, which means 5 o'clock because I have to get there, I told you I'm going to the...
yeah. How about... well, that's fine. So give me a time tomorrow, and I'll be there, I promise.
Yeah, best is email me. Because then I'll put it in my calendar when I'm not working with everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, email me best.
Okay, done. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question about standard deviation in chemistry?
Yeah. Believe it or not, I was a minor in chemistry, but it was a while ago, so no guarantees.
It's mostly about the standard deviation. I'm doing standard deviation in my chemistry class, general chem, to calculate error difference, and
exactly.
I got a little bit confused today because with this lecture, because we have 2 different formulas we use when we're calculating error with adding and subtracting, and then a different formula for multiplication and division. So is the calculator using the addition formula, or do you see what I'm saying?
There should only be one formula for standard. There's one with an n minus 1 and an n, but you're going to use sample standard deviation probably in chemistry because it'll be a sample. You can almost never do a population of something in chemistry, right?
Yeah.
You're doing lab experiments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's a sample. That's the first thing. That's sample standard deviation. And there's only one formula. Maybe there is.
It's like the values are each being divided by.
There's group data versus non-group data. So you might be talking about group data standard deviation. So
can I email these to you?
Yeah, you can email. So if post on the Q&A, you might as well. People don't have to look at it unless it's some personal thing, but it doesn't sound like it.
No, it's not.
Yeah, post on the Q&A. So it's a little different, and I'm going to stop share and then reshare the calculator again. And I'll show you something. Okay, so if I'm going to go to stats again, and I'm going to go calc, 1 var stats, and hit enter. See where it says freq list, and I didn't have one? So if you have a frequency table, then it's a different calculation of standard deviation because you don't have to treat there's a simpler way of doing it, and that's with the frequency table. So if you say, I did my chemistry and I had 4 items that had this value, I had 3 items that had this value, I had 12 items that had this value, then you could do a frequency table, and you could have 12 what I say, I had to, the first value, second value, third value, 4, 3, and 12 in the second list. And then you could do it with the frequency list with L2. And my guess is when you're talking about dividing by how many, that's probably what you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
So if you put it in a frequency table and then let your frequency list be L2. So when we go again, I'll go to stat, go edit, and let me clear out L1 and L2. So if you had, let's say, the value of 5, 4 times, then you had the value of 6, three times, and then you had the value of 9, let's say 12 times. What you can do is you can go to stat, you go to calc, you go to 1var stats, your list is L1, and your freq list, you go second 2, and that gets to L2. Enter, and then enter again. And my guess is that might be what you're talking about. Does that sound right?
Sort of. I want to check with my teacher. I'll check with my chemistry teacher, but it looks right.
Yeah, those are the 2 types of standard deviation calculations. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Okay, is when you have frequencies versus when you have individual.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and the book shows both, by the way. Again, I only do highlights and kind of the highlight for the, at least because you're going to do your projects. And for your project, you're not going to have frequencies. You're going to have just data. So I wanted to get you ready for that. And that is just the data, which is the first example I showed everyone. Okay, other questions?
I'm messing this calculator up. And no, I did not push delete. Jeez. Okay, I'll check you more. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, there's some chat, sorry. When I share screen, the chat gets erased. 2 posts for now. Thanks for now. Goodbye. Going to depress all information. Thanks. Good night. Okay, no specific questions. Might be dinner time for a lot of you too. Any other questions? Okay. Again, if you don't have a question, say good night, and we'll call it night. And then when there's no more, I log off. And I'll probably post this tomorrow because it's getting late and I'm hungry. It takes about an hour to post. Any other questions? Okay, if I don't hear from you or I don't see any questions, I think I'm going to end the meeting, even though you haven't left, but hopefully that means that you're done, but it's your last chance if you have any questions. Okay, let me stop the share. Let me go ahead and say goodbye to everyone. And if you're watching this as an archive webinar, thank you for watching. Don't forget to put the secret word into the secret word quiz so that you can get credit for watching this. And if you have questions, post on the Q&A form. So take care, and then probably tomorrow I'll be announcing the time for the next webinar. Good night.